At 7:42 a.m. on August 17, 1943, beneath the left wing of a P-38 Lightning, Technical Sergeant James McKenna silently watched Lieutenant Robert Hayes as he prepared for a mission that would likely be the last of his life. The pilot, Robert Hayes, was 23 years old, with 6 combat missions behind him and no kills. That day, 18 Japanese Mitsubishi A6M Zero fighters had been sent to intercept the American patrol, and he was flying straight toward them. For 8 months, McKenna had been maintaining P-38s and knew every detail of that aircraft, a twin-engine fighter with twin-tail booms, extremely fast in level flight and formidable at high altitude. But there was a deadly flaw that was decimating pilots. In a turn, the P-38 could not compete with the Zero. The Mitsubishi was lighter and incredibly agile. It could complete a horizontal turn in half the time it took a P-38, and that difference often meant death. The rules of the 5th Air Force were clear: P-38 pilots must never attempt to turn with a Zero. They had to use speed and altitude, dive, fire, climb back up, hit and run. Never get caught in a side-by-side turn with the enemy. Hayes had used that tactic 5 times but without success. The Zeros were too clever. They lured American pilots into tight turns, cut inside the arc, and followed them until they were shot down. In just 6 weeks, the 5th Air Force had lost 37 P-38s, almost all victims of turning engagements they couldn't escape. McKenna had watched too many pilots die, good men, all young, who climbed into their planes full of confidence and returned in coffins, or didn't return at all. According to the training manual, the fault lay in human error. Instructors claimed the pilots ignored procedures. But McKenna knew the truth: it wasn't them. It was the cable control system. The P-38's ailerons were linked by cables that ran through the twin-tail booms to the rear, then back forward through pulleys to the wings. Even the slightest slack, perhaps 3/8 of an inch at full movement, introduced a delay between the control stick and the aileron response. At high speed it didn't matter. But at low speed, during tight turns, that fraction of a second could mean the difference between turning inside a Zero or being shot down. 2 months earlier, McKenna had already reported the issue to the technical officer. The officer confirmed that cable tension was within specifications. The minimal play was allowed by factory tolerances, and changing it would void the aircraft's warranty. Moreover, no field mechanic could alter control systems. Any modification required authorization from Lockheed engineers, 7,000 miles away in California. So McKenna took an initiative that violated every rule in the Army Air Force's maintenance manual. He took a piano wire from a damaged plane, cut it to 6 inches, bent it into a Z shape, and installed it as a tensioner on Lieutenant Hayes's left aileron cable. The operation took 8 minutes. The modification added 0.4 pounds of tension, completely eliminating the slack. No one noticed. That morning's inspection team had only checked engine oil levels and ammunition load. McKenna said nothing. He watched Hayes taxi to the runway, take off, and vanish into the morning sky toward the Japanese fighters. Over the next 17 minutes, what happened would forever change how every P-38 in the Pacific was flown. The first pilot McKenna lost to a Zero was Lieutenant David Chin, on July 9, 1943. Chin had arrived in the combat theater just 3 weeks earlier. McKenna serviced his aircraft every morning. They often talked about California. Chin was from Sacramento, McKenna from Long Beach. Both had worked on cars before the war. Chin took off at 6:15 a.m. for a patrol and returned 2 hours later with 3 bullet holes in the left boom. He told of a Zero that had followed him through a turn as he tried to straighten and dive as the manual advised. The plane responded sluggishly, as if there were a delay between the control stick and the ailerons. Only his wingman's intervention, who shot down the enemy, saved his life. McKenna examined the holes, close together, precise, deliberate. The opponent had predicted exactly where Chen's plane would be, a shot only possible because the P-38's response had been slightly delayed. Chen never flew that plane again. It was sent to the depot for repairs, and 3 weeks later McKenna learned he'd been killed in another P-38 over Rabaul, caught in the same turning trap with no way out. The second pilot was Captain William Morrison, an experienced squadron leader with 11 kills. He knew the P-38 and its limits and flew with great caution. On August 3rd, his formation intercepted 8 Zeros at 12,000 feet above Oro Bay. Morrison shot down one fighter on the first pass and went in for a second attack, but 2 Zeros followed and engaged him. Listening to the radio, McKenna heard that Morrison attempted a split S maneuver to escape, but the controls felt soft. The Zeros chased him through the maneuver and shot him down at 4,000 feet. His wingman reported the plane seemed slow to respond, as if the pilot were fighting the controls. Morrison died in the crash. Morrison's crew chief was a friend of McKenna's, Rodriguez, an experienced Texan. Rodriguez suspected something was wrong with the P-38. After recovering the wreckage, he checked everything: engine settings, controls, surface alignment, cable tension. Everything was within parameters. No faults. The official report blamed pilot error. Rodriguez didn't believe it, and neither did McKenna. By mid-August, McKenna had seen 17 pilots die. Some he knew well, others only briefly during pre-flight checks, but he had worked on all their planes, signed the maintenance logs, watched them taxi away, take off. Some came back, others didn't. Those who returned always said the same thing: in tight turns, the P-38 seemed slow to respond, as if there was a tiny delay between control input and aircraft action. Many pilots thought it was normal: a heavy fighter, large control surfaces, some lag was expected. McKenna knew it wasn't. He could feel it with his own hands while working on the control cables, sensing that faint looseness in the system. He began paying attention to the sound of the cables during maintenance. There was a distinct tone, a low twang, when plucked. Loose cables vibrated differently from tight ones. McKenna could tell the difference. Every P-38 on the line had slightly loose cables, within specs, but still loose. He talked to Rodriguez one evening after Morrison's death. Rodriguez asked if anything could be done. McKenna replied, "Officially, no. Unofficially, yes, but it'd break every rule in the book. We'd be facing a court-martial." The problem wasn't pilot ignorance. They knew perfectly well, every briefing repeated it, every training flight drilled it endlessly: never turn with a Zero. Use speed and altitude. Hit and run. The doctrine was clear. The problem was that in combat, the rules didn't always work. Lieutenant Robert Hayes had been in New Guinea for 2 months. 23 years old, a farm boy from Iowa, 6 combat missions, 0 kills. He wasn't inexperienced, he was disciplined. He followed the rules. And those rules often left him powerless against the Zeros. On his 3rd mission, Hayes attacked a Zero from high altitude, reaching 400 miles per hour, diving out of the sun, just as the manual prescribed. He lined up the target in his gun sight and calculated the lead. The Zero rolled sharply left and dove. Hayes tried to follow. The P-38 turned, but it felt like it was moving through molasses. By the time the plane pointed in the right direction, the Zero was gone. No shots fired. Hayes climbed back up, frustrated and helpless, ready to try again. The 4th mission went even worse. Hayes and his wingman engaged 2 Zeros at 15,000 feet. Hayes fired first but missed. The Zero broke sharply to the right, and Hayes rolled to follow. Over the radio, his wingman warned him: 2 more Zeros were diving from above. Hayes tried to level the aircraft and dive away. The P-38 responded, but sluggishly. Too sluggishly. One of the diving Zeros managed to hit him with a 3-second burst along the right boom. 20mm rounds. They didn't penetrate, but they terrified Hayes, who broke off the fight and returned to base with both engines smoking. On the 5th mission, Hayes witnessed the death of his wingman, Lieutenant Thomas Parker, 21, from Boston. They had trained together. On August 14th, Parker became separated from the formation during an air battle over Finschhafen. 2 Zeros got on his tail. Parker tried every maneuver he knew: rolls, reversals, scissors turns, but the Zeros stayed locked on through every move. Hayes heard his voice over the radio: panic, calls for help, cries that the plane wouldn't turn fast enough. Then the bursts. Then silence. That night Hayes didn't sleep. Neither did most of the squadron. Parker's bunk remained empty. His personal belongings were packed and sent home. His P-38 was listed as lost in combat. No mechanical failures found. The official cause: pilot error during defensive maneuvers. McKenna had worked on Parker's plane that very morning. Everything was perfect: engines synchronized, control surfaces aligned, cable tension within limits. The plane was fine. Yet Parker was dead. McKenna knew why. That fraction of a second delay in the controls, that tiny slack the manual deemed acceptable, had killed Parker, just as it had Morrison, Chen, and 14 other pilots. The worst part was the smell. Every morning in the maintenance area, McKenna breathed aviation fuel, hot metal, hydraulic fluid, the scent of planes ready for combat. Some would come back, others wouldn't. And he would be there again the next day, with the same smells, working on new planes, watching new pilots walk toward machines that wouldn't respond fast enough to save them. On the evening of August 16th, Hayes came into the maintenance area and found McKenna working on his P-38. He asked if there was anything that could make the plane roll faster, anything at all, even if it broke regulations. He just wanted a chance. McKenna looked at him. He saw fear, desperation, the awareness that without a change, he was a dead man. He told him to come back the next morning. He'd see what he could do. That night McKenna worked alone. The hangar was silent after 11 p.m. Most of the crew were asleep. The only sounds were the distant hum of generators and the faint buzz of insects against the lights. The air smelled of engine oil and tropical humidity. He removed the inspection panel from the left boom of Hayes's P-38. The metal was still warm from the day's sun. The aileron control cable ran through a series of pulleys into the tail section. McKenna grabbed it with both hands and pulled. He felt the slack, about 3/8 of an inch before the tension took hold. His hands were greasy, fingers sore from a full day's work, but the play was obvious. Wrong. He knew it was wrong. The piano wire came from a P-38 wrecked 2 weeks earlier in a runway overrun. The aircraft was a write-off, but McKenna had salvaged some useful parts before it was sent to the depot, including a 6-inch piece of high-tensile steel wire from the rudder trim system. He'd kept it in his toolbox, not knowing why. Now he knew. Sitting on the hangar floor, with pliers and wire, he bent it into a Z shape. The metal was stiff and resisted the bend. It slipped twice, slicing his thumb on the second try. Blood made the wire slippery. He wiped it on his coveralls and continued. It took 8 minutes to get the shape right. The Z would serve as a tensioner, adding the pre-tension needed to eliminate even the slightest slack in the cable. Installation was even harder. The space inside the boom was cramped. McKenna worked one-handed, holding the flashlight with the other. The beam flickered, casting dancing shadows over the cables. He bumped his shoulder against the edge of the boom, cutting his arm. Sweat ran down his back despite the still, humid night air. He disconnected the cable at the pulley joint. His fingers slipped, and the pin fell inside the boom. He spent 5 minutes searching for it in the dark before finding it again. All the while, his heart pounded. If the technical officer caught him modifying a flight control system without authorization, he'd face court-martial, possibly a dishonorable discharge, maybe prison. But Hayes would die if he did nothing. He fitted the tensioner between the cable end and the pulley, reconnected everything. The joint was tight. He had to force the pin. When it locked, he tested the tension by hand, no slack. The control surface moved instantly. Perfect. McKenna reattached the inspection panel, put away his tools, wiped the blood from the wire and his hands, and left the hangar at 1:15 a.m. The tropical night was heavy and still. From afar, the rumble of aircraft engines, probably Japanese raiders, tightened his stomach. He had just modified a flight control system without clearance, using a non-standard part, breaking dozens of regulations. If it failed, Hayes would crash, and the blame would be entirely his. But if it worked, Hayes might live. McKenna went to his bunk but didn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling until dawn. By 6:30 a.m., he was already on the flight line, watching the crew refuel and arm Hayes's P-38, seeing him head to the briefing and climb into the cockpit. At 7:42, Hayes took off. McKenna watched him rise into the morning sky, join the formation of 16 other planes, and head northwest toward Japanese airspace. All he could do was wait. The engagement began at 8:14. Hayes's formation intercepted 8 Zeros at 13,000 feet over one gulf. The morning sun was behind them, perfect for a diving attack. Hayes flew in the third position. The leader signaled for the surprise strike. They dove. Hayes picked a Zero at the rear of the formation, dropping from above and reaching 380 miles per hour. The Zero grew larger in his gun sight. He could see the rising sun emblem on the fuselage, and the pilot's head in the cockpit. Hayes took aim and squeezed the trigger. The 4.50 caliber machine guns and the 20mm cannon roared. Some rounds struck the Zero's wing, but it wasn't enough. The Zero rolled sharply right and dived. Hayes rolled to follow. And that was when he felt it. The airplane responded instantly. No delay, no lag. The control stick moved, and the P-38 rolled at once. Hayes had never felt his plane so responsive. It was as if the aircraft was waiting for his command, executing it at the very instant he gave it. He rolled 90 degrees in what felt like half the usual time. He dropped the nose. The Zero was there, right in the gun sight. He fired again, a 3-second burst. The rounds tore through the fuselage from tail to cockpit. The Zero's engine exploded, fragments flying away. The plane fell inverted toward the jungle, trailing a ribbon of black smoke. Hayes's first kill, but there was no time to celebrate. His wingman called out, "Zeros diving from above." Hayes looked up, 3 enemies, shallow dive, coming fast. They had seen their comrade go down, and wanted revenge. Hayes shoved the throttles forward and began to climb, but the Zeros were faster. They would catch him in seconds. The only option was to reverse and engage. Every instinct told him to keep climbing and escape, just as doctrine said. But following doctrine meant dying that day. He rolled violently left and pulled up. The P-38 answered like never before. The nose came level with the horizon. He saw the Zero ahead, turning to follow, but it hadn't expected Hayes's reversal to be so quick. The enemy was caught exposed, out of position. Hayes lined up the shot, fired, and struck the Zero's left wing. It folded. The plane went down. 2 kills in 30 seconds. The other 2 Zeros tried to force an overshoot by alternating turns. Hayes stayed with them. Every time they turned, the P-38 reacted immediately. No lag, no struggle with the controls. The plane did exactly what he wanted, the instant he wanted it. It felt like flying a different machine, as if invisible weights had been lifted from the control system. 1 Zero made a mistake, turned too sharply and lost speed. Hayes entered the curve at close range, about 60 meters, and fired. He couldn't miss. The Zero exploded, debris scattering across his windshield. The P-38 shuddered as fragments struck the right boom. 3 kills. The 4th Zero fled. Hayes didn't chase, low on fuel and ammunition. He climbed back to altitude, rejoined formation, and they returned to base. The entire fight had lasted 7 minutes. When he landed at Dobadura at 9:03, McKenna was already on the flight line. Hayes shut down the engines, climbed from the cockpit with trembling hands and a flight suit soaked in sweat, and went straight to McKenna. "It worked," he said. What neither of them knew was that 6 other pilots had watched the fight from above. Captain Frank Mitchell, formation leader of the 475th Fighter Group, had followed the entire battle from 15,000 feet. He noticed something strange. Hayes's P-38 rolled faster than any Lightning he had ever seen. The plane maneuvered as if it weighed half as much. Mitchell knew every pilot in the theater. Hayes was good, but not that good. Something was different about his aircraft. After landing, Mitchell found Hayes in the briefing room. Hayes, still running on adrenaline and with trembling hands, was filling out his combat report, 3 confirmed kills. Mitchell asked what had changed. Hayes said he didn't know, the airplane just responded better, faster. Mitchell asked if maintenance had done anything. Hayes pointed at Sergeant McKenna. Mitchell found McKenna in the maintenance area 2 hours later. He was working on another P-38, hands black with grease, coveralls stained with hydraulic fluid. Mitchell asked directly, "What did you do to Hayes's airplane?" McKenna looked at him for a long moment, then said, "The piano wire tensioner, the cable modification. An unauthorized change to the flight control system." Mitchell listened without interrupting. When McKenna finished, he asked if the same modification could be made to his own plane. McKenna said yes, but warned him of the risks. It wasn't approved, not tested, and if anything went wrong, they'd face serious charges. Mitchell replied that he didn't care. He had lost 4 pilots in the past month, all trapped in turns they couldn't escape. If there was even a chance to save the others, he wanted to try. Regulations could wait. That evening, McKenna worked on Captain Mitchell's P-38, installing the same piano wire tensioner with the same method. The next morning, Mitchell flew it and came back ecstatic. "The plane rolls like a fighter, not a truck," he told his wingman. The wingman, intrigued, spoke with McKenna and asked for the same modification on his own plane. By August 20th, McKenna had already applied the change to 9 P-38s. Word spread quickly through the squadron. Pilots began asking their crew chiefs if they had heard about the cable modification. Some refused, bound by the rules. Others were ready to try. McKenna showed them how: cut the wire, bend it into a Z, insert it as an inline tensioner. 8 minutes were enough to transform the aircraft's response completely. The practice spread rapidly among pilots and mechanics alike. There was no official documentation, no engineering approval, only whispered conversations in ready rooms and between trenches on the maintenance line. Hayes scored 2 more kills on August 22 thanks to the modified controls. Mitchell shot down 3 on the 25th. Other pilots returned from missions with confirmed victories. The numbers began to speak for themselves. Lieutenant James Watkins, chief mechanic of the 49th Fighter Group stationed at Gussap, heard of the modification from a pilot transferred from Dobadura. Skeptical, he tried it on 1 aircraft. On the next mission, the pilot returned with his first kill after 8 fruitless weeks. Watkins repeated the mod on 4 more planes, and soon other crew chiefs in the 49th followed suit. By early September, about 40 P-38s in New Guinea carried the modification. The engineering officer at Dobadura noticed something was changing but couldn't figure out what. Cable tensions always measured correctly during inspections. The crew chiefs removed the tensioners before checks and reinstalled them afterward. The pilots knew, the mechanics knew, but no one told the officers. The kill reports began to shift. In July, American pilots in the Southwest Pacific lost 2 P-38s for every 0 destroyed. In August, the ratio dropped to 1.3 to 1. By September, it was nearly even. Something had changed, but officially, no one could explain what. Then the Japanese noticed, too. By late August, enemy pilots reported that something was happening. In the combat reports of the 11th Air Fleet, they noted that American P-38s were maneuvering more aggressively, rolling faster in turns, reversing direction more quickly. Tactics that had worked for months suddenly failed. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai was one of Japan's most feared aces, with 64 confirmed kills, and he had been fighting American pilots since the days of Pearl Harbor. On September 3, 1943, Sakai engaged a P-38 over Wewak. He used his usual tactic: lure the American into a turning fight, wait for the P-38 to start rolling, and then reverse his own turn to cut inside the enemy's arc. But this time, the P-38 followed the reversal without delay. Sakai, who knew the Lightning's roll rate perfectly, nearly collided head-on. The American had him in the gunsight, and Sakai had to dive away to save himself. He returned to base confused and frustrated. Other experienced Japanese pilots reported similar encounters. The Americans hadn't changed their tactics, but their planes were responding faster, fast enough to break the rhythm the Japanese pilots had relied on. Japanese intelligence tried to understand what had happened. They examined the wreckage of downed P-38s, but found no obvious modifications. The aircraft looked identical to the ones they had been fighting for months. Same engines, same weapons, no visible differences. What the Japanese didn't know was that the change was hidden inside the boom, a simple 6-inch piece of piano wire that looked like an original component. Even if they had found it, they likely wouldn't have understood its function. It wasn't a new weapon system or an upgraded engine, just a small variation in the tension of the control cables. And yet, that tiny change was costing them pilots. By mid-September, the P-38s were inflicting losses on the Japanese at a rate unseen since the start of the war. The psychological impact was enormous. For 2 years, Zero pilots had ruled the skies in turning battles, confident in their superiority. Now that confidence was wavering. Pilots who had once attacked without hesitation grew cautious and uncertain. Their trusted tactics no longer worked as they once had. The Japanese tried to adapt. Some gave up turning fights with P-38s, switching to hit-and-run tactics, but by doing so, they abandoned the Zero's greatest advantage, maneuverability. Others tried to compensate with aggression, closing in fast and firing immediately, taking greater risks. But aggression without the ability to outturn the P-38s only meant dying faster. Many skilled pilots lost their lives in September trying tactics that had worked perfectly just 2 months earlier. The main problem for the Japanese was that they were fighting an invisible enemy. They knew something had changed, but not what, and not how to counter it. You can't develop effective tactics against a modification whose existence you don't even know. By the end of September, Japan's 11th Air Fleet had lost 38 fighters in engagements with P-38s, while the Americans had lost 22 in the same period. For the first time in the Pacific War, the kill ratio had flipped. The Lightnings were outperforming the Zeros. Japanese command ordered its pilots not to engage P-38s unless they held a clear numerical advantage, marking a turning point. The Zero, once the predator of the skies, had become the prey. And it all came down to a simple piece of piano wire that was never supposed to be installed. The modification was never officially recognized during the war. The U.S. Army Air Forces became aware of it in October 1943, when a maintenance inspector at Dobudura noticed inconsistent cable tensions, traced the discrepancies to the piano wire tensioners, and filed a report. It sat on desks for 3 weeks while officers debated what to do. The modification violated regulations, but it worked. Squadrons that adopted it had far higher kill rates, and their pilots survived. The question was no longer one of effectiveness, but whether to punish the mechanics who had made the unauthorized change or approve it retroactively. In November 1943, Lockheed sent a team of engineers to New Guinea to evaluate the system. They tested the modification, measured cable tension, calculated loads, and performed flight trials. The conclusion was clear: the modification was safe and effective, and it should have been part of the design from the beginning. Lockheed incorporated a similar system into the P-38J models that entered production in December 1943, but McKenna never received any official recognition, no medal, no commendation, no mention in the reports. In Lockheed's official documents, the credit went to engineering analysis, and McKenna's name appeared nowhere. Hayes survived the war. He completed 63 combat missions, shot down 11 Japanese aircraft, returned to Iowa in 1945, married his high school sweetheart, had 4 children, and worked as a crop duster pilot for 37 years. He never forgot McKenna's gesture. Every August 17th, he would call him to thank him for saving his life. Mitchell also made it home. He became a squadron commander, led his unit in the Philippines, and shot down 16 enemy planes. After the war, he stayed in the Air Force, retiring as a colonel in 1963. For years, he told young maintenance officers the story of McKenna's modification, emphasizing that the best solutions often come from frontline mechanics, those who notice problems engineers can't see. McKenna remained in the Army Air Forces until 1946, then returned to California, went back to working on cars, and opened a small repair shop in Long Beach in 1948. He worked on engines for 42 years, rarely speaking about the war. When someone asked, he would simply say, "I'm a mechanic. I fix airplanes, that's all." In 1991, a military historian researching field modifications to the P-38 discovered references to a piano wire tensioner in New Guinea maintenance logs. Following the trail, he tracked down James McKenna through veteran records. McKenna was 73 and still working part-time in his shop. When asked about the modification, he confirmed it but downplayed its significance. It wasn't anything special, just something that needed doing. The historian estimated that the simple wire tensioner may have saved between 80 and 100 lives, based on the improved survival rates of the squadrons that had adopted it. McKenna never kept count. He only remembered the pilots who came back: Hayes, Mitchell, Watkins, and others. That was enough. James McKenna died in 2006 at the age of 88. He was buried at Pacific View Memorial Park in California. His obituary mentioned his service as an aircraft mechanic in World War II but made no reference to the piano wire tensioner, no mention of how he changed the way American fighters flew, nor that he had broken regulations to save lives. His Long Beach workshop still exists, though under different ownership. Yet in the back office, a faded photograph remains, a young mechanic in coveralls standing beside a P-38 Lightning, with a note on the back that reads, "August 1943, New Guinea." This story reminds us that innovation in wartime doesn't always come from committees or official channels, but from mechanics and sergeants who spot problems, find solutions, and act without waiting for permission, saving lives in the process. If this story moved you as much as it moved us, leave a like on this video. It helps share other forgotten stories of World War II. Subscribe to stay updated on upcoming videos. Every story matters, every memory deserves to live on. Thank you for watching and for keeping this legacy alive.